I don't know exactly when it first started, but I'll guess it started about 1 or 2 months ago. Now, I pretty much do everything routine, so I pick up small changes that happen within my environment pretty quickly. Somewhere in the beginning of this experience, I was laying in my bed trying to sleep, and I had a huge whiff of what smelled like really bad feces. The smell seemed to stick to me too. I was trying to find where the smell was coming from, but the smell was everywhere I was trying to smell. And then, the tapping started. I thought maybe the sound was caused by my fan because the tapping started above me on the headboard where the fan was facing. I haven't smelt the smell again, but I've been hearing this tapping every night, sometimes above me, to the sides of me on the walls, and it now seems to like to perch on my computer desk away from me. The sound sounds as if a person with really long nails were tapping their nails left to right on the desk, as if annoyed with you at random times in a sporadic manner, and at times right before I almost fall to sleep. I've also turned the fan off, so I can't figure where any moving parts are to cause this sound. And when I turn the lights on, the tapping stops too, and the tapping only starts when I have the lights off. And some other weird things have happened since this started. My blinds fell during the night and made a huge crash. I woke up and found a jack-in-the-box toy placed in the center of my kitchen. I hear, on occasion, crackling coming from my electronics, and just recently, an empty water bottle being crushed in my room. I have verbally told this thing to leave in a prayer-like manner, but it won't, and I've done this a few times. I have internally prayed and it is still yet to leave. I'm sorry, but this is the best that I can explain my situation, but it feels more intense than I can verbally describe. At this moment, I'm not exactly scared of this thing, but I feel like it doesn't have any good intentions for me, and I would like to get rid of it, but I have no idea how. Any ideas? This happened 3 years ago, in the middle of July. I'm a female and I was 16 years old at the time. I live in Canada, Ontario, and everyone usually has this image that Canada is really safe. However, that perception will not stop any creepers. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens here from time to time, more often now than before. To start off, I live in the suburbs. It isn't the safest city that I live in, but it can be safe if it's in the daytime, along with being in a well-crowded area. I was going on an evening walk, which I did quite often during the summer, usually before sunset, as I had to be home before that. The path I take my walk on is on the sidewalk of a main road, so there are a lot of cars passing by, and there's still quite a few cars passing by before sunset, as this is the time some people get home from work as well. I was walking, minding my own business and enjoying the cool evening air. A car honked and I didn't think much of it because I wasn't sure if it was at me, but there also wasn't much traffic either. On the sidewalk, there is an entrance to the plaza so cars driving into the main road can turn into the plaza. I looked both ways to make sure a car isn't going to pull in and I crossed. Strangely, after I crossed, I noticed the same car from the corner of my eye, and this is when I realized that the honk was probably at me. After I crossed, I looked back. I don't know why I looked back, but I acted on my hunch to look. I now wonder if I could have avoided this if I just didn't look. In that moment, the man made eye contact with me as his window was down. He was turning into the plaza, although his car wasn't really in the plaza. He turned his car into the entrance of the plaza and just stopped it so he was completely blocking off the sidewalk. If any cars wanted to come in, they can't because he's blocked it off at this point with his car, and if anyone is walking on the sidewalk, they'd have to go around his car. I was really confused and a little bit alarmed. He opens his car door and starts to approach me, and I begin to back away so he isn't too close to me. To describe the man, he wasn't that tall, but still taller than me. He wore these big black sunglasses, so unfortunately, I don't know what his entire face looks like. He wore a Brazil t-shirt, FIFA World Cup at the time, and white pants. He began to converse with me, telling me that he thought I was the woman that worked at some sort of shop that he goes to, and I told him no. I knew that this was a red flag and was probably all BS, but I wasn't too panicked yet, although I had my guard up the entire time. I didn't want to talk to this man, but I didn't want to make it appear that I was frightened, so he doesn't try to pull some kind of stunt or something. He was still trying to create conversation with me, and he repeatedly kept telling me that I was beautiful, to the point where it would make anyone feel uncomfortable, which really did make me feel uncomfortable, but I just played it off by saying thank you. He then asked me how old I was, to which I then said that I'm a minor, thinking that maybe he'll just leave me alone. Clearly, I thought wrong though. He then asked me where I was from, to which I thought saying my ethnicity isn't something private, so I told him. I responded saying to him that I was from Syria. I don't know why I asked the same thing back to him, because I realized that I'm just feeding the conversation, but at the same time, I didn't want to show my fear, so I was just trying to appear calm. He then told me that the old president of his country was Syrian, which is probably a lie, and was just trying to find some way to relate to me. He then told me Arabic women are very beautiful, and at some point in this conversation, he kept calling me beautiful and pretty, which was still making me pretty uncomfortable. He asked me if I were looking for any guys, and if I was interested, and obviously I told him no. He then said, "What, does a boy cause you trouble?" And I reply saying that that stuff is all a waste of time, thinking if I said that, maybe this time he would leave me alone, because at this point he seems like he's trying to hook up with me, or had some other intention, judging by the way he was acting and talking, which is not something someone usually initiates on the sidewalk of a main road. I don't know why I have tolerated this uncomfortable conversation at this point, because he then tells me, "You're so beautiful. I don't see why boys wouldn't like you." On the inside, I'm thinking what the hell does someone say in response to that, so I just awkwardly forced out a laugh. He then proceeded to say, "Seriously, how old are you?" I know I shouldn't have said what I said just now, but I told him how old I was. I said I was 16. He just stood there saying, "Wow, I never would have thought that you were 16. You seem way more mature. I thought that you were at least 24. I took the opportunity to ask how old he was, since he was so persistent in knowing my age. He was 32 years old. This man was twice my age. I asked for his name because, in the back of my mind, I felt like if I had this info about him, it could maybe be useful. Again, this was probably not a good idea because I realized afterwards that this was only feeding the conversation. He told me his name, and his name was Jonathan. He asked me for my name, and I said that that's a secret. At the time, I was thinking that that was slick of me, but I'm actually pretty thankful that he didn't get aggressive. He kept insisting that he'll move his car from the middle of the entrance so that we can talk further, and I said no to this, that I had to get going, and I said that I was leaving, to which he said why. He then started asking for my number, and I said that I don't give my number to strangers. He was telling me that he really wanted to be in contact and started asking if I had a Facebook or WhatsApp, to which I said no. He kept insisting that we keep in contact after I repeatedly refused to give him any sort of contact information. And then he says, "Look, I'm going to go to move my car." I thought that this was my chance to leave, so I said, "Okay, well, I've got to go. Bye." At this point, I had just had enough, and I thought that this was the end of it, because I heard him say bye after I turned around to leave. But when I looked up to my right, after walking a bit, I noticed that he was following me in his car. He rolled down his window and began to smile and wave at me, which was really disturbing. This really freaked me out too, so I started to walk faster. When I looked back, I didn't see his car, but I was able to connect the dots to realize that he went into the gas station that was behind me. Unfortunately, this still wasn't over too. His car was parked in the gas station, and he proceeded to walk on foot, on the same sidewalk that I'm walking on, so I definitely believe now that he was following me. My fight or flight mode broke in, and I began to run home, which was only minutes away. I even took off my sandals so that they wouldn't snap and end up hurting myself. I also stopped for a moment to explain to these two ladies that there was this man following me, to which they looked at me like I was crazy and ignored me. Fortunately, I made it back home safely, and when I looked back, I couldn't see Jonathan, so I assumed that he just turned back when he saw me running. I consider myself lucky that he didn't start running after me, and I truly believe that if all of this didn't occur on the sidewalk of a main road, but rather in a secluded area, he probably might have tried something. I don't know what it was, but his presence just made me feel uncomfortable. And needless to say, these evening walks also came to an end. I've always been interested in the paranormal and urban legends, but it never scared me. I would read into ghost stories and unsolved mysteries associated with the paranormal. I was a pretty lonely kid, so I had a lot of time, but never ever would I have thought that I would have had my own encounter. I live in a pretty small and quiet town. It bored me that nothing really happened there, and if something did, everyone knew. I had one friend that lived on the other side of town, and I would go and see him sometimes. We would hang out, play games, or chill at the park. His mum was pretty strict about him going places though, as he lived in the rough side of town, so I would have to walk to his. The journey from mine to his was around 40 minutes, and that's if I used the shortcut through the cemetery, which I did most of the time. It saved me around 15 minutes, which, being a lazy teenager, saved a lot of effort. My friend's name was Will, and me and Will had planned a day of playing on the PlayStation 3 as he had pre-ordered and bought Black Ops 2, and also his parents were gone for the weekend. But I ended up having an argument with my mum where she then grounded me. Being 14, I was really upset that I wasn't allowed to go out, so we both decided that I'd sneak out of the night as my bedroom was on the bottom floor and play at his until around 5, where I would then come back. It seemed like a great plan, but looking back on it now, I wish I weren't so rebellious. It came to about 12 and I was ready to sneak out. As I climbed out the window, I left the hatch open so I could get back in. I also had my key on me, just in case. I had started jogging down the street when I noticed two kids walking towards me. The yellow lights lit the road and partly the path, and as I was running towards them, I noticed that it was a little girl holding an older boy's hand. When I ran past them, I had noticed that the boy looked around my age, and the little girl looked 5 or 6. I didn't stop. In fact, I started running when I went past them. I don't know why, but they both seemed really odd to me. But I decided to look back, to see that they were both turned and looking at me. By then, I was practically sprinting. I didn't want to be out here in the dark like this anymore. After about 10 minutes, I reached the gates of the cemetery. I stood in front of them, contemplating whether to go the long way down the main road. But I didn't want to get caught on the side of the main road, so I jumped the metal gate and started jogging through. The cemetery had a long road down the middle of it, where massive oak trees grew either side of it, shadowing the graves in the road. I had gotten halfway through when my body froze in horror. I had heard someone say something. "Excuse me?" I turned around in horror to see that boy again, standing about 10 feet away from me. I didn't say anything. I was staring at this boy, just in disbelief. He was wearing a purple hoodie with blue jeans and some plain sneakers. "Hi," he said. My eyes shot up to his face to see that he had no eyes. Well, it looked like that, until I saw a light reflection. A shiver flew up my spine, and my brain was screaming at me to run. I had seen and read about these black-eyed children before, and how they'd ask for help or how they'd start talking to you just to turn you into one of them. As I was thinking about all of this, he had stepped forward and I stepped back. In the distance, I could also see the little girl standing next to one of the oak trees, just looking at me. "Please, don't hurt me. Please, just leave me alone," I said to the boy, my voice trembling and my eyes were on the verge of crying. I just wanted to go home. "Please, help me," he said as he started walking towards me. I turned and ran as fast as my legs could take me, and within a minute, I had climbed over the fence and into the streetlights. I was shaking, and now I was crying my little heart out. I tried to stand up, but found myself falling. It took me about 10 minutes to stand back up, too. I don't know what that was about, but it was weird. By now, it was 12:30, and I didn't want to be on the streets anymore, so I ran all the way back, but along the main roadway. After this, I didn't sleep much for about a week because I was paranoid that they had followed me home. I have been through the cemetery since, but I try to avoid it at all costs. But since that day, I've never seen those kids again. I did further research into the black-eyed children, but all the stories were the same. I'm still wary to this day about walking in the dark. I've been living in Massachusetts for all 17 years of my life, and it's always the same old shit. Waking up on cold mornings, grabbing a cup of Dunk's coffee, and heading off to either work or school, depending on if it's the weekend or not. Though, on this particular cold Saturday morning, I had the day off work. I called up my longtime friend Jacob, and we decided to go over to his place and hang out. It was about 10 a.m. when I arrived at his place, so we decided to smoke and go for a walk in the woods in the back of his house. Just for a little background info, the woods in the back of his house were pretty dense and started abruptly at the edge of his backyard. There was also a path about 200 feet long, leading from his backyard to a clearing, about 100 yards squared. It was meant for farming, but it was never used, so it's just an empty clearing. As kids, we loved to explore back there, and as teens, we used it as our regular smoke spot for when we hung out. As we were walking back out there, we heard what we thought were other footsteps. We stopped immediately, and the other set of footsteps kept going for about a second, and then they stopped also, attempting to mimic our movements. It was 10 a.m., mind you, so we were very aware of our surroundings, and we didn't see a single other person in sight. So Jacob just brushed it off as an animal or something, but I still had a bad feeling. We kept going along the path until we reached the clearing, and as per usual, we went out there and smoked. We shot the shit, and I lit up a cigarette and I turned on my speaker to listen to some music. Joy Division, The Smiths, you name it. Jacob and I were pretty different kids. We were the type that liked to pretend that we were both grown up in the 80s, but in reality, we were two losers destined for failure, growing up in the 21st century. We both thought that we were pretty tough guys, but after this day, we were definitely proved wrong. After hanging out for a while, Jacob and I decided to go to the convenience store down the road from his house to grab some breakfast burritos that the family running the store made. There was a path connected to the clearing that was a shorter route to the store, so we went that way. We acquired the said burritos, which were delicious by the way, and headed back for our hangout spot. When we got back, something was very off though. There was a table with a red cloth draped over it. We didn't put it there, and as far as we knew, we were the only people that ever ventured out in that area. It was really strange, but Jacob and I decided to not mess with it and just to leave it alone. After we finished our burritos, we headed back to Jacob's to carry out the rest of the day. We had planned to meet friends at the skate park and sesh there for a bit. After hanging out at the skate park for most of the day, we went back to Jacob's, and we decided to head out to the clearing one more time. As we walked through the woods, we saw an ominous orange glow from the center. We glanced at each other, and back at the glow.
My eyes had adjusted after turning off our flashlights, and I could make out 20 or so black-robed figures gathered around the fire. We just stood there and watched for a bit until we heard a collective murmur, like a chant of sorts. And then, that's when we heard it. The loudest shriek I have ever heard. It sounded like some sort of wild animal getting mutilated or something. Well, Jacob and I whipped around and booked it back to his place for the night, each of us shitting ourselves on the way back. And needless to say, we didn't sleep that night. We went back out the next morning, and we found the most gruesome scene I've ever witnessed. There, on the same red table, was the butchered corpse of something. Jacob actually dry heaved because the stench was just unbearable. We ran back to his house and we called the police immediately. The police did come out and they took photos and taped off the scene. Weeks later, we heard from the police, but they told us that they wouldn't give us any information. It's actually been a year since the incident, and Jacob and I, we haven't been back to the clearing since then.
G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.